pressed her face against the cold viewing port of the diplomatic station, watching the endless parade of alien dignitaries flow through the corridors below. Each species moved with their own unique grace, their forms adapted to worlds she could only imagine. The crystalline floated like living gemstones, their faceted bodies catching light in rainbow patterns. The swayed on their root-like appendages, leaves rustling with each step. Even the hulking granite warriors carried themselves with dignity, despite their stone-like appearance. Everyone belonged except her. Ambassador had found her as an infant on a derelict ship drifting near the neutral zone. No records, no identification, no clues to her origin. The diplomat had taken pity on the strange creature with its pale skin and odd bilateral symmetry. For 17 years, he had raised her as his daughter, but never felt like she fit into his world or any other. The diplomatic station housed representatives from 47 different species, each with their own customs, technologies, and social structures. Had learned their languages, studied their cultures, and tried desperately to find where she might belong. But her appearance always marked her as other, as wrong. There were elegant beings with elongated limbs and iridescent skin that shifted colors based on their emotions. Their society valued harmony and consensus above all else. They moved through social situations like dancers, reading subtle cues in each other's color patterns and responding with perfect synchronization. Static pale skin and inability to change colors made her clumsy in their social ballet. She had tried living with other species too. The mechanical collective had been interested in her biological processes, but ultimately found her too chaotic and unpredictable. The empathic reef had welcomed her emotions, but been overwhelmed by their intensity and complexity. The scholar priests of Terminus had appreciated her quick mind, but been disturbed by what they called her aggressive curiosity. Each failed attempt at integration left more isolated. She spent her days in the station's archives, studying star charts and historical records, searching for any clue about her origins. The few references to bilateral humanoid species in the galactic databases were either extinct civilizations or unconfirmed from the unexplored regions. Ambassador did his best to help her, but even his love couldn't bridge the gap between them. His skin would darken with worry whenever he looked at her, and she knew he blamed himself for her unhappiness. The other on the diplomatic team treated her with careful politeness, but she could see the confusion in their color-shifting displays when they thought she wasn't watching. The worst part was the constant attention from researchers. Every few months, another species would request permission to study her, fascinated by her unique physiology. They would run their scans and take their samples, always promising answers that never came. She had become a living mystery, a puzzle that no one could solve. Dr. Helix of the Quantum Collective had been the latest. The energy being had spent weeks analyzing her cellular structure, convinced that her bilateral symmetry held some key to understanding evolutionary development. But even their advanced quantum scanning had revealed nothing more than what was already known. She was unlike anything else in the known galaxy. The isolation was crushing. Would watch other young beings of various species forming friendships, sharing experiences, learning about their heritage and place in the universe. She had none of that. No ancestral traditions to follow, no cultural identity to claim, no sense of belonging anywhere. Her adoptive father had arranged for her to receive the finest education the galaxy could offer. She spoke 12 languages fluently, understood the basics of 30 more, and could navigate the complex social protocols of dozens of different cultures. But all that knowledge felt hollow when she had no people to truly call her own. The diplomatic station was preparing for the Galactic Unity Summit, a massive gathering that happened once every 5 standard years. Representatives from over 200 species would attend, including many that rarely left their home sectors. Ambassador was working day and night to prepare, his skin cycling through stress patterns that had learned to recognize. She tried to help where she could, using her linguistic skills to translate documents and her cultural knowledge to advise on protocol questions. But even her contributions felt superficial. She was an outsider looking in, someone who understood the forms and functions of diplomacy without truly comprehending the deeper connections that bound the galactic community together. Late at night, when the station's corridors were empty and the artificial lighting dimmed to simulate a rest period, would walk the observation decks and stare out at the stars. Somewhere out there, perhaps, were others like her. But the galaxy was vast beyond imagination, and she was just one lost individual with no way to find her way home to a place she had never known. The medical bay had become another source of frustration. The station's chief physician, a kind aquatic named Dr. Bubo, had done everything possible to help her understand her own biology. They had discovered that her species required a specific mixture of atmospheric gases to feel comfortable, that her body temperature ran higher than most known sentients, and that her nutritional needs were quite different from anything in their standard dietary database. These discoveries had led to improvements in her living conditions, but also highlighted just how different she was. Special air filtration systems, custom food synthesizers, temperature controls that other species found uncomfortably warm, all served as constant reminders that she didn't belong. The social challenges were even worse than the physical ones. Young beings of other species would approach her with curiosity at first, drawn by her unusual appearance and mysterious origins. But the conversations always felt forced and awkward. She couldn't share childhood experiences of growing up in their cultures, couldn't relate to their family traditions, couldn't participate in their coming-of-age rituals. Some tried to be kind, but their pity was almost harder to bear than outright rejection. Others were simply puzzled by her existence, treating her like an interesting anomaly rather than a person. A few were openly hostile, viewing her as some kind of genetic aberration that didn't belong in civilized space. Ambassador had tried to arrange cultural exchange programs, hoping that exposure to different societies might help her find her place. But each attempt had ended in disappointment. The rigid hierarchies of the hive minds had no room for an individual without a designated role. The free-flowing communities of the Star Dancers had been overwhelmed by her intense emotions and direct communication style. Even simple things like clothing had become a source of stress. Each species had their own standards of dress and personal presentation, adapted to their physiology and cultural values. Had a collection of garments from dozens of different worlds, but none of them felt right on her alien frame. She had settled on simple, functional clothing that drew the least attention, but even that felt like giving up on finding where she truly belonged. The approaching Unity Summit represented both hope and dread for her. On one hand, it would bring together more species than she had ever seen in one place, including some from the far reaches of the galaxy. Perhaps among them would be someone who recognized her features or knew something about her origins. On the other hand, it would also mean being surrounded by thousands of beings who all belonged to something greater than themselves while she remained alone. Ambassador had mentioned that there would be cultural displays and demonstrations as part of the summit activities. Each delegation would present aspects of their civilization's art, music, and traditions. Had volunteered to help coordinate these events, thinking that immersing herself in the diverse expressions of galactic culture might somehow help her find her own identity. But as she watched the preparations unfold, she felt more lost than ever. The delegation was preparing a light symphony that would tell the story of their species' evolution from separate tribes to a unified planetary consciousness. Other species had equally meaningful presentations planned, each one celebrating their unique heritage and place in the galactic community. What could she contribute? What story could she tell about her people when she knew nothing about them? What traditions could she share when she had none? What identity could she celebrate when she was completely alone in the universe? The weight of her isolation pressed down on her as she stood in her quarters, looking out at the preparation activities through her viewport. Tomorrow would bring new species, new possibilities, and new disappointments. But tonight, she was just a lost child staring at the stars and wishing she knew where she came from. The Unity Summit had transformed the diplomatic station into a bustling metropolis of alien life. Corridors that usually accommodated a few dozen beings now pulsed with hundreds of different species, each bringing their own atmosphere processors, dietary requirements, and cultural artifacts. The station's environmental systems worked overtime to maintain dozens of different atmospheric zones, creating a complex web of life support that allowed beings from the deepest ocean worlds to coexist with creatures from gas giants and desert planets. Threw herself into her coordination duties, hoping that constant activity would distract her from the growing sense of displacement. She had become the unofficial liaison for first contact protocols, helping newly arrived delegations navigate the station's complex layout and cultural requirements. Her unique perspective as someone who belonged to no particular group made her surprisingly effective at bridging gaps between species that had never encountered each other before. But 3 days into the summit, her carefully maintained composure began to crack. She was in the main assembly hall, helping to resolve a dispute between the silicon-based Confederation and the plasma entities over territorial boundaries, when she noticed someone watching her from across the room. The being stood apart from the various delegation clusters, observing the proceedings with obvious professional interest. They were tall and bipedal like herself, but their features were harder to make out from this distance. What caught attention was their clothing, simple but somehow more practical than the ornate diplomatic garments worn by most other representatives. She tried to focus on the territorial dispute, but her eyes kept drifting back to the mysterious observer. There was something about their posture, the way they held themselves, that seemed familiar despite the distance between them. When the silicon-based delegates finally agreed to a temporary compromise, excused herself, and began working her way through the crowd. By the time she reached the spot where the figure had been standing, they were gone. She searched the immediate area, checking side corridors and observation alcoves, but found no trace of them. The feeling of familiarity lingered, leaving her unsettled and distracted for the rest of the day. That evening, during a cultural presentation by the Harmonic Collective, spotted the figure again. They were seated in the back section of the amphitheater, partially hidden behind a delegation of tall, crystalline beings. This time she was determined not to lose sight of them. The Harmonic Collective's performance involved thousands of individual voices, creating complex musical patterns that told the story of their species' development from separate communities to a unified planetary consciousness. As the haunting melodies filled the space, quietly made her way around the perimeter of the seating area. She was almost within speaking distance when the lights suddenly brightened to signal the end of the performance. In the general movement and applause that followed, the mysterious figure vanished again, leaving frustrated and beginning to wonder if she was imagining things. Ambassador noticed her distraction at the evening meal. His skin shifted through concerned blue patterns as he asked if she was feeling well. She tried to explain about the mysterious observer, but the words sounded foolish even to her own ears. How could she describe a feeling of recognition for someone she had never clearly seen? The next morning brought a crisis that temporarily drove all other thoughts from her mind. A delegation of deep ocean dwellers had suffered a catastrophic failure in their aquatic life support systems. Without immediate intervention, 3 members of their diplomatic team would die within hours. The station's emergency protocols were designed for atmospheric beings and had no provisions for this type of crisis. Found herself coordinating rescue efforts despite having no official authority. She contacted every delegation that might have compatible technology, arranged for emergency habitat modifications, and even convinced a group of silicon-based engineers to work alongside aquatic specialists despite their species' traditional incompatibility. The efforts were successful, but barely. By the time the deep ocean dwellers were stabilized in a makeshift aquatic environment, was exhausted and running on pure adrenaline. She was reviewing the improvised life support systems when someone touched her shoulder. She turned to find herself face-to-face with the mysterious observer she had been trying to approach for days. Up close, the resemblance was startling. They were definitely bipedal with bilateral symmetry, pale skin, and features that seemed almost familiar despite being completely unknown. But there were differences, too, that became clear as she studied their appearance. Their hair was darker than hers and cut in a style she had never seen before. Their clothing was indeed practical rather than decorative, made from materials she didn't recognize, but which seemed perfectly suited to their form. Most striking were their eyes, which held an intensity and intelligence that spoke of experiences far beyond anything she had encountered in her sheltered diplomatic life. "You did well with the crisis," they said in accented but fluent galactic standard. "Quick thinking and natural leadership. Not many beings could have coordinated that kind of multi-species emergency response." Stared at them, momentarily speechless. After days of trying to track down this mysterious figure, having them simply appear and start a normal conversation felt surreal. "Who are you?" she finally managed to ask. "My name is," they replied. "I'm a cultural consultant, which is basically a fancy way of saying I help different species understand each other when they're having communication problems. I've been observing the summit proceedings to identify potential areas of conflict before they become serious diplomatic incidents." "But you're like me," said, stating the obvious but needing to hear it confirmed. Bilateral, bipedal, similar features. Are we the same species? Studied her carefully, their expression growing thoughtful. We might be. I've been wondering the same thing since I first saw you 3 days ago. I've traveled to hundreds of worlds and met thousands of different life forms, but I've never encountered anyone who looked quite like us before. The conversation was interrupted by Ambassador's arrival. The diplomat's skin shifted through rapid color changes as he took in the scene before him. There you are. The Engineering Council wants to thank you personally for your assistance with the aquatic crisis. They're saying your coordination efforts prevented a major diplomatic incident. He paused as he noticed, his color patterns shifting to curious yellow-green hues. I don't believe we've been introduced. I am ambassador of the collective. Independent cultural consultant, replied, extending his hand in what recognized as a gesture of greeting from some of the historical databases she had studied. I was just complimenting your daughter on her handling of the emergency situation. His colors shifted to pleased blues and purples. Has always had a gift for bringing beings together, despite her own challenges with belonging. She speaks 12 languages and understands the social protocols of more species than most professional diplomats. Impressive, said, looking at with new interest. That kind of linguistic and cultural flexibility is rare. Most beings have trouble understanding even a few species outside their own evolutionary branch. As they talked, found herself studying more closely. His mannerisms were different from hers, suggesting he had been raised in a completely different environment. But there were similarities, too, that went beyond physical appearance. The way he processed information, the intensity of his attention when listening to others, even small gestures and expressions felt familiar in ways she couldn't explain. I was wondering, said after Ambassador had left to attend to other summit business. Would you be interested in meeting privately? I have some information about our potential species that might interest you. His heart raced at the possibility. After 17 years of searching for answers about her origins, she might finally be about to learn something meaningful. Yes, absolutely. When and where? Tonight, after the formal presentations end. There's an observation deck on level 7 that should be quiet enough for a private conversation. The rest of the day passed with agonizing slowness. Tried to focus on her coordination duties, but her mind kept wandering to the upcoming meeting. She had so many questions that she didn't know where to start. Where had come from? How long had he been traveling the galaxy? Did he know anything about their home world or their people? She also found herself observing him whenever their paths crossed during the day's activities. He moved through the diverse crowds with easy confidence, seeming equally comfortable talking to crystalline energy beings as to methane-breathing gas giant dwellers. There was a natural adaptability to his interactions that she recognized in herself, but taken to a much higher level. When evening finally arrived and the day's official presentations concluded, made her way to the designated observation deck. Her hands were trembling with nervous anticipation as she activated the door controls. Was already there, standing at the main viewport and looking out at the stars. He had changed from his practical daytime clothing into something more formal, but still distinctly different from the ornate diplomatic wear favored by most species. Thank you for coming, he said as she approached. I wasn't sure you would want to hear what I have to tell you. I've been searching for answers about my origins for my entire life, replied. I'm ready to hear anything you can tell me. Nodded and gestured toward the stars visible through the viewport. Our species is called humanity, and we come from a world called Earth in what you probably know as the Outer Spiral Territories. We're not part of the galactic community, at least not officially. Felt her breath catch. Not part of the galactic community, but how is that possible? Every spacefaring civilization is required to register with the Galactic Council. The Council doesn't know we exist, explained. Earth is located in a region that most galactic surveys classify as too sparse and resource-poor to warrant detailed exploration. We've been developing independently for thousands of years, while the rest of the galaxy assumed that sector was empty. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Then how are you here? How do you know about galactic civilization? I'm what humans call a scout, said. For the past 50 years, a small number of us have been secretly observing galactic society, learning your languages and customs, studying your technologies and political structures. We wanted to understand what we would be dealing with before making formal contact. mind raced as she tried to process this information. 50 years? But I've been here for 17 years, and I was found as an infant. That means humans have known about the galaxy for my entire lifetime, but no one tried to find me. His expression grew somber. We didn't know you existed until a few years ago. When we finally identified the derelict ship where you were found, we realized it was one of ours. A deep space exploration vessel that disappeared 18 years ago with a crew of 6, including a family with a 1-year-old child. The observation deck seemed to tilt around as the full weight of his words sank in. My parents were explorers. Your parents were Dr. Sarah and Dr. Michael, studying extremophile life forms in the neutral zone. They were part of humanity's first unofficial attempt to make contact with galactic civilization. Their ship encountered some kind of emergency that forced them to evacuate, but only your escape pod was ever recovered. Tears were streaming down his face as 17 years of questions finally began to receive answers. Are we related? Distant cousins, according to the genetic records. Your father was my great-uncle, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. I brought something for you. The device projected a holographic image of 2 humans standing together in what appeared to be a laboratory. They had features similar to hers, and they were smiling at the camera with expressions of excitement and determination. In the woman's arms was a small child with unmistakable resemblance to Young. This was the last transmission they sent before their ship disappeared. They were so excited about the potential for peaceful contact between humanity and galactic civilization. They believed that understanding between different species was not only possible but essential for everyone's survival. Stared at the image of her parents, seeing herself in their faces for the first time in her life. What happened to them? We don't know for certain. The wreckage suggests some kind of catastrophic system failure, possibly caused by an encounter with an unknown energy phenomenon in the neutral zone. But the escape pod records show they made sure you were safe before dealing with whatever was destroying their ship. The weight of this revelation was overwhelming. For 17 years, she had felt alone and displaced, a unique being with no heritage or identity. Now she was learning that she belonged to an entire species, that she had family, that her parents had died heroes trying to bridge the gap between human and galactic civilization. There's more, continued gently. I'm not here just to tell you about your past. I'm here to offer you a choice about your future. The silence stretched between them as absorbed words. A choice about her future. After 17 years of feeling adrift in a universe where she didn't belong, the concept of having options seemed almost incomprehensible. What kind of choice? She finally whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow break this moment and send her back to her previous existence of endless questions without answers. Activated another function on his device, and the holographic image changed to show a blue-green world suspended against the darkness of space. It looked different from the other planets she had seen in galactic databases, somehow more vibrant and alive despite being just a projection. This is Earth, he said. Our home. Humanity has been preparing for formal first contact with galactic civilization for over a decade now. We've learned your languages, studied your cultures, and developed technologies that can interface with galactic systems. But we've also learned something important from our years of observation. The image zoomed in to show cities that seemed to grow organically from the landscape, sprawling forests that stretched between urban centers, and oceans that teemed with life. It was beautiful in a way that none of the sterile diplomatic stations or carefully controlled alien worlds could match. What have you learned? Asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. We've learned that galactic civilization, for all its diversity and accomplishments, has become rigid in some fundamental ways. Species are expected to fit into predetermined categories, to follow established protocols, to suppress aspects of themselves that don't align with galactic norms. The very thing that makes you feel like an outsider here is what makes you perfectly suited to be humanity's first official ambassador to the galaxy. His breath caught as the implications hit her. Ambassador me. Think about it, continued, his expression growing more animated. You speak 12 languages fluently and understand dozens of cultural protocols. You've successfully mediated disputes between species that have been in conflict for centuries. You have no political allegiances to any existing galactic faction, which makes you the perfect neutral party. And most importantly, you understand what it feels like to be different, to not fit into existing categories. The observation deck suddenly felt too small to contain her racing thoughts. She walked to the viewport and stared out at the stars, trying to imagine a world where her differences were assets rather than obstacles. "But I don't know anything about being human," she protested. "I was raised by I think in their social patterns I follow their protocols. How can I represent a species I've never known?" "That's exactly why you're perfect for the role," said, moving to stand beside her. "Humanity's strength has always been our adaptability, our ability to learn from other species and incorporate their best qualities into our own development. You've already been doing that your entire life." He gestured toward the main areas of the station, where the various delegations were winding down their evening activities. "Look at how you handled the aquatic crisis yesterday. You didn't follow any single species protocol for emergency response. You improvised, combining techniques from different cultures to create a solution that none of them could have developed alone. That's uniquely human thinking." Considered this as she watched a group of silicon-based beings working alongside aquatic specialists to finalize the improved life support systems. She had brought them together despite their fundamental incompatibilities, finding common ground that their own diplomatic protocols had failed to establish. "What about Ambassador?" she asked. "He's been my father for 17 years. I can't just abandon him." "You wouldn't be abandoning him," assured her. "If anything, you'd be fulfilling the role he's always hoped you could achieve, the value harmony and consensus above all else. By becoming humanity's ambassador, you'd be creating the foundation for the most comprehensive cooperation the galaxy has ever seen." A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting entry to the observation deck. Quickly deactivated his device as Ambassador appeared in the doorway. His skin colors were cycling through confused patterns as he took in the scene. "I've been looking for you. The Cultural Exchange Committee wants to discuss your proposal for modified presentation formats to accommodate species with different sensory capabilities." He paused, noticing her tear-stained face. "Is everything all right?" She looked between and her adoptive father, feeling torn between two different futures. "There's something I need to tell you. Isn't just a cultural consultant. He's my cousin. We're the same species." The diplomat's colors shifted through rapid cycles of surprise, concern, and calculation. "The same species, but that would mean you're not unique. There are others like you." "Many others," confirmed. "An entire civilization that's been developing independently while the galaxy assumed our region was uninhabited. Has the opportunity to become our first official ambassador to the Galactic Council." His colors stabilized into a pattern recognized as deep contemplation. For several minutes, he stood silently processing this information. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of genuine emotion. "I always knew this day might come," he said softly. "From the moment I found you on that derelict ship, I suspected you might have people somewhere who were looking for you. I hoped you would find them, even though I knew it would mean losing you." "You wouldn't lose me," protested. "No matter what I choose, you'll always be my father. You raised me, taught me everything I know about diplomacy and relations. Without that foundation, I could never even consider taking on a role like this." The colors shifted to warm, pleased hues. "You're right, of course. And perhaps this explains why you've always been so gifted at bringing different species together. It's not just training or natural talent. It's your heritage asserting itself." Over the next few hours, the three of them talked through the implications of this revelation, shared more details about human civilization, their technological capabilities, and their hopes for integration with galactic society, offered insights into the political complexities they would face and the protocols they would need to follow for formal first contact. As the station's artificial dawn cycle began, they had outlined a preliminary plan. Humanity would make formal contact with the Galactic Council through existing diplomatic channels, with serving as their initial representative. Her unique background and established relationships within galactic civilization would help smooth the integration process. But first, she would need to visit Earth to learn about her own species and understand what she would be representing. The thought of seeing the world where her parents had lived, of meeting other humans and finally understanding her own heritage, filled her with excitement and terror in equal measure. "There's one more thing you need to know," said as they prepared to end their meeting. "Humanity has been observing galactic civilization for decades, and we've identified some significant threats that most species aren't aware of. Dark energy anomalies in the outer spiral, resource depletion patterns that could lead to major conflicts, and evidence of hostile intelligence in the unexplored regions. Felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of hostile intelligence? We're not entirely sure yet, but our deep space monitoring stations have detected signs of massive technology movements in the galactic rim regions. Whatever it is, it's on a scale that could threaten every known civilization. That's actually one of the reasons we decided to make contact now rather than waiting longer. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just offering to join galactic civilization, they were potentially offering to help defend it against unknown threats. His role as ambassador would be far more important than simply facilitating cultural exchange. Ambassador's colors had shifted to deep, worried purples. If what you're suggesting is accurate, then the Galactic Council needs this information immediately. The Unity Summit would be the perfect opportunity to present these findings to all major species simultaneously. That's what we were hoping, agreed. But we need someone with established credibility to present the information. Someone the Council trusts, who can bridge the gap between human concerns and galactic priorities. Looked out at the stars one more time, thinking about her parents and their dreams of peaceful contact between species. They had died trying to explore the unknown regions, possibly encountering the very threats that was describing. Her choice wasn't just about finding her own identity anymore. It was about honoring their sacrifice and potentially saving countless lives. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I'll become humanity's ambassador, but first I want to address the Unity Summit about these threats. Every species needs to understand what we might be facing." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and coordination. Transmitted detailed threat assessments to the human observation posts, while worked with the summit organizers to arrange for an emergency session. Found herself at the center of the most important diplomatic initiative in galactic history. When she finally stood before the assembled representatives of over 200 species, she felt the weight of 17 years of preparation settling into place. All those languages she had learned, all those cultural protocols she had studied, all those years of feeling like an outsider finally made sense. She wasn't meant to fit into existing categories. She was meant to create new ones. "Distinguished representatives," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the massive assembly hall. "I stand before you today not just as the ward of ambassador, but as the first official representative of a species that has been observing our galactic community for decades while remaining hidden in the unexplored regions." The hall erupted in surprised murmurs and rapid communication between delegations. She waited for the noise to subside before continuing. "My name is, and I am human. My species comes from a world called Earth, located in what you know as the outer spiral territories. We have been preparing for this moment for over 50 years, learning your languages, studying your cultures, and developing technologies that can contribute to our shared civilization." She activated s device, projecting the images of Earth and the threat assessments for everyone to see. "But we come to you not just in friendship, but with urgent warnings about dangers that threaten every world represented in this assembly. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive technological movements in the unexplored regions, signs of intelligence that could pose a threat to all known civilizations." The next several hours were spent in detailed presentations and intense discussions. Species that had never cooperated before found themselves working together to analyze the human data and develop response strategies. Ancient enemies put aside their differences to focus on the larger threat facing all of them. As watched the representatives of 200 different civilizations unite around a common cause, she finally understood what it meant to belong. She wasn't meant to fit into any single culture or species. She was meant to be the bridge between them all, the translator who could help them understand each other well enough to face the unknown together. Her parents had dreamed of peaceful contact between humanity and galactic civilization. They had died exploring the dangerous regions where the new threats were emerging. But their daughter had survived to fulfill their vision on a scale they never could have imagined. Standing at the podium with Ambassador beside her and coordinating with the human fleet preparing to join the galaxy, finally felt like she had found her place in the universe. She was human, she was galactic, and she was exactly where she belonged.